Facebook. It is our hope and our prayer that this time together will bless us, that it will be a liberating time, that it will be a transformational time. And so we greet you in the joy of the Lord as a pastor. With that said, if you are joining us via Facebook, we invite you to go ahead and share this broadcast. If you can, we want to reach as many people as possible. With that said, today we have two facilitators who are joining us today from the Bermuda Psychological Association who will help to facilitate the discussion. Our first facilitator will be Dr. Allison Daniels. Dr. Allison Daniels is a clinical psychologist born and raised here in Bermuda. She's the current president of the BPA here in Bermuda and the vice chair of the Bermuda Psychologist Council. Dr. Daniels completed her doctoral degree at Argosy University in San Francisco Bay Area. That's out by Dr. Thema's area out there in California, and completed her postdoctoral internship at Alameda Family Services. Dr. Daniels worked with children, adolescents, and their families, specifically with homeless teens and in their drug and alcohol education and prevention programs. Dr. Daniels has been employed by the government of Bermuda for the last 9 years, working in the Department of Education as the psychologist and testing supervisor, conducting developmental and autism assessments, and coordinating the cross-ministry early childhood assessment team. Dr. Daniels is currently works at the Department of Health as a program manager for the Child Care Regulation Program. So she is our first facilitator. And then we have with us, I see her, she has joined us, Dr. Sharita Rayner. Dr. Rayner is a registered clinical psychologist here on the island of Bermuda, born in Bermuda. Dr. Rayner completed her post-secondary education in the United States, attending Albright College in Reading, Pennsylvania. That's my wife's hometown. Amen. Also at Loyola University in Maryland, in Baltimore, Maryland, and Alliant International University in San Francisco, California. Dr. Rayner is active in the psychological community, currently serving as a secretary to the Bermuda Psychological Association. In addition to serving as a member of the Bermuda Parole Board, Dr. Rayner is employed by the Bermuda Hospital Board as a clinical psychologist and serves as a member of the Bermuda Hospital Board's Ethics Committee. Dr. Rayner is currently the coordinator of the Mental Health First Aid Program. Dr. Rayner is the founder of, I don't know if I'm pronounced Chrysalis, Bermuda, I think I said that correctly, a private psychotherapy practice serving as an adult and older adult, and serving an adult and older adult population. So these are two facilitators today. In a few moments, they're going to give us some ground rules. But we also want to take a moment to welcome Dr. Dorinda Green, the president of the Bermuda College right here on the island, the esteemed president of the Bermuda College, who will introduce our guest, Dr. Thema, more formally right now. Amen.
Good afternoon, everyone, on this bright and sunny day in Bermuda. And it is an honor for me to present our speaker this afternoon, Dr. Thema Bryant, author, psychologist, professor, researcher, consultant, podcaster, Amy ordained elder, and sacred artist. Dr. Thema is the incoming president-elect of the American Psychological Association, the leading scientific and professional organization representing psychology with more than 120,000 members. She completed her doctorate in clinical psychology at Duke University and her postdoctoral training at Harvard Medical Center's Victims of Violence program. She is currently a tenured faculty professor of psychology in the Graduate School of Education and Psychology at Pepperdine University, where she directs the Culture and Trauma Research Laboratory. Her clinical and research interests center on interpersonal trauma and societal trauma of oppression. Currently, she serves as the elected vice president and racial equity officer for her neighborhood council in Los Angeles. She is also a member of the Association of Black Psychologists, where she incorporates culturally based interventions in her teaching, research, and practice. Dr. Thema has received many honors for her contributions in psychology and mental health. Her most recent being in 2020, when the International Division of APA honored her for her international contributions to the study of gender and women for her work in Africa and the diaspora. Dr. Thema has received public awareness, has raised public awareness regarding mental health by extending the reach of psychology beyond the academy and private therapy office through community programming and media engagements, including, but not limited to, headline news, National Public Radio, and CNN. Dr. Thema is the author of 4 books, the most recent being Homecoming, that is the topic of today's workshop. She also hosts a mental health podcast by the same name. Having earned a Master's of Divinity, Dr. Thema is an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church and also directs the mental health ministry at First Amy Church in South Los Angeles. Dr. Thema has utilized sacred dance and spoken word therapy in community forums and faith communities. Dr. Thema is a sought-after speaker and workshop facilitator. So we are honored that she has taken time out of her very busy schedule to be with us this afternoon, coming all the way to us virtually from Los Angeles. Dr. Thema, greetings from Bermuda.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you, Dr.
So before we
Green.
get started, I'm just going to pull up my screen so that oh, sorry about that.
No, go ahead, Dr. Allison.
Sorry, I was just going to say I'm going to pull up my screen so everybody can see our ground rules. Very brief. Sorry, of course, it was all ready until we get started. So, there we go. Can everybody see my screen? So just very simple. When you're joining, if you can mute your mic, if you're not speaking, just be very respectful of each other, our experience, our perspectives. Try to limit your distractions on your screens for those that do have their cameras up. Feel free to ask questions. You can do that by raising your hand. You can put them in the chat if you're not comfortable saying your questions. And I know that we have the live stream, so you're more than welcome to put them in the chat on Facebook and we will convey them here. Let's all try to maintain a positive atmosphere. We can try to do that by one person speaking at a time. And just for everybody's awareness, people can be removed if they are not following the ground rules. So I turn it over to Dr. Bryant.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I am honored and excited to be with you all on today. And this is a beautiful day that we have set an intention for our healing, for our wholeness, for our restoration, and to know that we are deserving and worthy of that. And so whether you are joining us in Zoom or in the live stream on Facebook or YouTube, or whether you're watching the replay, I want you to know that we are honored by your presence, and I am honored by your presence and by our co-hosts and co-sponsors, that we have our faith leaders, the heads of our college, the heads of our psychological association, coming together around wholeness. I mean, this collaboration is what it's all about, for us to really think holistically about what it means for us to walk in the fullness of life, for us to think holistically about not being stuck in our past, but being mindful that our present will make sense when we make peace with our past. And so I come to you as a psychologist and a minister, but I also come to you with someone who has had my own life's journey and has had to have my own homecoming. And so with that reality, I'm going to share my screen and walk us through our process, and we'll take questions as they arise. All right, so we are gathered to reflect on homecoming, reclaiming our whole authentic self. Despite all of the experiences of the past and the present, that we are worthy of our own homecoming. And so I like to start off by acknowledging who I am. Who is it that is speaking to you? And I am a woman of African descent, along with being an educator, a therapist, a researcher, a consultant. I am also a mother, a sister, a daughter, an advocate, an artist, a spirit woman. And with all of that, it is a reminder to each of us to claim and hold on to the fullness of our identities. And so I tell my students at Pepperdine University, if you get to the day of graduation and you have left yourself behind, it was not worth it. It wasn't worth it. And so nothing that we are attaining, whether it is a degree, status, title, a paycheck, a relationship, none of that will be worth it if it requires us abandoning ourselves, neglecting ourselves, erasing ourselves. And all of us have been through some circumstances that chipped away at our own identity, whether that was a job or a person or the family you grew up in or addiction or the stress of life. But we want to be mindful, to be tuned into the fullness of our identities and to know that that is a gift, that who you are, it is not a burden, it is a gift. And we want to really claim that and land in that. I also want to name that I live and work in a land that has been cultivated by the Tongva peoples and other indigenous peoples. And it is important for all of us to honor those who worked the land where we reside and where we work. And thinking of that, it's also important to give a labor recognition. And the labor that I want to acknowledge in this moment is that of people of African descent, who historically our labor was very much tied into our worth, where literally we were given a price tag. And so, what that has meant for the acceleration of nations based on the exploitation of our ancestors. And so, it is important that they are honored, that they are recognized, and that we live our lives in such a way that we have not forgotten. And so, the phrase, and do remember me. And so we remember. I also want to name that when I talk about homecoming, especially for marginalized communities, that it is not something that is merely intellectually interesting to me, right? It's not just something I'm curious about, but I recognize the urgency of our wellness, the urgency of our wholeness, that there is so much that is designed to distract and to discourage us and to push us away from the truth of the sacredness of our being. And so I hope on today that something within the next 2 hours will give you a glimpse, a reminder, a holy wink, so that you can recapture the truth that you are a sacred being, worthy of care and respect and compassion and honoring and space to be yourself, to be all the way yourself. And so when people say, is the president-elect of APA doing African dance? Absolutely, 100%. So be wherever you go, show up as yourself. It is a gift not only to you, but to the place. Because when we enter into spaces and take on silence, then we are not representing, we are merely tokens. And I don't know about you, but I am absolutely committed to not being a token, to not just being a face that people can place on a brochure or a website, not just being a puppet that repeats what has been given, the lines that have been given, but for us to show up in truth, for us to show up in truth. And so, with that being said, I'm glad you're here with all of your layers as we are layered beings. So, as we consider this notion of homecoming, it really is about healing and wholeness. And the way that we heal starts off with us being willing to tell the truth. If I pretend like I'm fine and publicly when people say, "How are you?" the appropriate answer is, "I'm fine, and you?" Or if you're a churchy person, you might say, "I'm blessed and highly favored." But we need spaces where we can say how we're doing for real. And so I want to invite you to shatter the silence and shatter the shame. And looking at this image, if you would go in the chat box and note the number which best describes where you are today or in this season of your journey. And even if you're on YouTube or Facebook, you could put down your number. Six, 10, 7, 7, 10, 9, 7, 13, 16, 13, 5, 15, 10. Thank you so much for your transparency. And let me ask, someone said is 1 the lowest? It's based on the image that was on the screen. I don't know, can you see the picture? I'll put it back. So if you're listening but not looking, you won't be able to pick a number. There's an image with different people doing different things. So you would need to look at that image to see what mostly captures where you are right now. All right. So as we shatter the silence and shatter the shame, because we said it's a workshop, not a speech, I would like to ask if there are 2 or 3 people who are willing to briefly share what made you pick the number you picked. Tell us what that image was doing and how that connected with you. Let's hear from 2 or 3. And someone said 15, not 13. 6. Mhm. Yes,
Would you mind
Bonnie.
putting the picture up again, just so people can answer as they look at it?
Yes.
Thanks.
Hi, Dr. Thema. I'm Bonnie.
Hi.
Hi. I guess because I'm on the cusp of a change in my journey, contemplating, what the
I'm
next
sorry, which number was it?
6,
Okay, yes, continue.
contemplating what the next part of the journey looks like, and not yet having some certainty, but listening for God's direction and trying to patiently listen for that direction.
Yes. Thank you so much. When you're in transition and listening, especially when we're facing uncertainty. Thank you. And was it Melissa whose hand was also up? Melissa?
Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself. Greetings, everyone. I picked 15. I wouldn't have picked 15 a year ago, but I've had a year of a journey. And part of that journey meant taking like a pompano pause, I call it, where I wouldn't have picked 15 a year ago, but because my mom passed in April last year. And it's been a really interesting journey. However, I learned that healing is a choice. And I would go to Pompano once a month and just zola up on myself and take that moment and just me, and enjoyed it. And it has helped to keep me connected along with those who have cuddled around me. So I'm grateful. I'm in such a much better place. And I'm celebrating that moment. Knowing that journeys take you along paths that sometimes you don't expect or predict, but still keeping that faith and moving forward. So right now, given that it's almost June, and anyone in school, that school base knows what that time is like, I'm good.
Yes, beautiful. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And it really is a testimony, right, of saying, I'm in a good place, and that's not where I was before. And so definitely our condolences on your loss. And it also, helps to bring encouragement and hope for those who are not in that place to know it's possible to get there, even if you are not there in this moment. So thank you. Allison.
So I put myself as a 7.
Mhm.
I feel that I'm on a journey and a transition, and I'm moving myself up that tree, and I'm also helping those that are beneath me. And so I don't see 7 as a low number or a bad number. I see it as sort of, I'm excited to keep moving up and make sure that I'm moving up with those that I'm working with.
Beautiful. It brings to mind for me that lift as we climb, right? That as I'm doing my journey, also reaching back to help others. Beautiful. All right. Anyone else?
Yes, Clara Ann.
Yes.
I chose number 5. Normally, I'm pretty upbeat and can go for it, but this year, on the 19th of May, actually would make 9 years that my husband passed away, and tomorrow would have been our 24th anniversary. So I think for me, this last 10 days has been kind of rough, trying to be upbeat and struggling at it.
Yes.
Normally I'm midway in the tree, but today I feel like I just want to lay down. I don't feel like doing anything.
Yes. Beautiful. Beautiful sharing. And I appreciate the transparency. And it's important to lay down, right? That's a part of us being honest with ourselves, tender and gentle with ourselves, of like, what do I need today? And sometimes we're so much trying to like push through and treating ourselves like machines and not giving ourselves the tenderness. And so I'm grateful for you naming it, and definitely we are sending our love and support during this anniversary season for you. So thank you for sharing that. I'm not able to see everyone, so I'll pause and see, is there anybody else who wanted to share? Yes, Dr. Samantha.
Good morning or good afternoon for you guys. Good morning for me from LA. Thank you for this opportunity to share. I would say I'm 2 numbers. It just depends on the time of day. I find myself in between like a 10 and an 8, and I don't see either of those as being in a negative space, but just to explain, I feel like I'm at a 10 in that position, primarily because, as my other colleagues on the call have shared, I'm also in a period of transition, trying to relocate part of my practice to Bermuda and bring a new specialty and everything else. And that's exciting. It's something that I've always wanted to be in the position to do. And it's finally at that time, but also an 8 because it's a significant period of transition for me. It's a lot of uncertainty. It comes with a lot of understandable and expected stressors with having to introduce a new specialty to a country that hasn't seen it. And also a desire to want to do the best I can for everyone, while at the same time also dealing with some identity issues in that, you know, having to walk away from the security that I have here potentially, and walk away from the practice that I've built here to then come back home, which is great and scary. So I would say I'm both numbers, and I reserve that space for myself to give myself the grace to be able to fluctuate and not feel as though being in the midst of that fluctuation suggests that I'm in a negative place, but more so I'm allowing myself that space to feel different feelings and be okay with that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for naming that the homecoming has mixed feelings, and that is truth. And I think oftentimes we think like one feeling has to overshadow another, right? If someone is upset or disappointed, people say, oh, you should just be grateful, as if you can't be both grateful about some things and disappointed about others, or excited and nervous, right? As you're saying, stepping into the unknown, and this is exciting, and also, you know, concerning of like, what is to come? Like, what is this going to be like? And so it's actually perfect timing that you went just at that moment, because what I am going to ask people to do now is back in the chat box. If you can open that, or if you're on the live stream, go to the chat box. And if we can share on today 2 different emotions that you are feeling. So you might be excited for this workshop, but also sleepy. You might be drained, but also hopeful. You may be any number of things. You might be in love, you might be brokenhearted. So 2 different emotions that you're feeling on today, so that we can, again, shatter this myth that to feel one thing cancels out everything else. Tired and excited. Amen, amen. Excited and grateful. Yes. Excited but missing my family. Broken and searching. Thank you for truth. Peaceful and mildly stressed. Lots to do. Yeah. Sad and content. Thank you. You know, this is truth. Stressed and hopeful. I think we can all relate. So important. Excited and resentful. Yes, thank you. Stressed and thankful. Definitely. Peaceful and some stress. Broken-hearted and expectant. Concerned and hopeful. Grateful for the invite and searching for directions and guidance. Happy and distracted, watching a graduation. I understand. Sometimes we have to look, healing and multitasking. Excited, stressed, and thankful. I appreciate it. Beautiful. So thank you all for sharing. And before I move forward, I'm just going to check in with our facilitators to ask if anybody on our streaming platforms answered, if you want to read their answers.
Nothing just yet.
Okay, no problem. I just want to make sure they're included. All right. Excited, honored, and apprehensive, all at the same time. Yep. So we can relate. And sometimes after I look at the chat box, it makes me unshare and reshare lessons we learn from teaching on Zoom. All right. Doesn't want to open the big screen. Let's try again. All right. So defining homecoming. What does it mean to come home to myself? Homecoming is telling myself the truth and then living based on that truth. Homecoming is being rooted in authenticity, that I am real, that I am not needing to pretend or alter or contort myself in order to be acceptable to other people, in order to be chosen by other people, in order to be deemed worthwhile, but to know in my bones who I am and that I am enough means that I have come home to myself, that I am not looking outside of myself for someone to tell me who I am, and I'm not looking outside of myself for someone or something to say I am enough. And so it is a journey that we have to take as a result of the stress and trauma of life. So stress and trauma can disconnect us from ourselves and can cause us to operate in survival mode. And so when I'm in survival mode, I am anxious, I am fearful. Some are in a place of hopelessness and terror. And we know that when we are stressed out or traumatized, we often don't make wise decisions because we make decisions out of being frantic or out of being desperate, out of feeling that kind of your back is against the wall. And so then we can just choose based on our fears and our anxieties. And so each of the experiences in our lives that create a lot of stress or that have been traumatic to us will require an additional homecoming. So there are multiple times in our lives where we awaken to the reality that I have lost sight of myself and I need to reconnect. I need a homecoming. And so there are a number of types of trauma and stressful events that may have caused you to disconnect. Some who are here are survivors of childhood abuse. Some who are here are survivors of sexual assault. Some have been in abusive relationships. Some have lived with the stress of poverty. Some have dealt with racism and other forms of oppression. Some have dealt with layoffs and unemployment. Whatever the experience was, some experienced bullying and microaggressions, some experienced isolation. And so we reflect on the journey of our lives, some including abandonment or neglect. Some people are gathered in the aftermath or in the process of heartbreak. And so each of these experiences can take us away from ourselves. Incarceration or the incarceration of a loved one, also medical conditions, including a global pandemic. And so we are affected by recognized and unrecognized losses. And these little boxes don't tell the whole story, right? So people can show up in the box, camera on or camera off, but that's only giving you a glimpse. And so it is so important for us to have compassion for ourselves and for each other, recognizing that each person is carrying a lot, and culturally or religiously, many of us were raised not to show our pain. And so Harlem Renaissance, there was a poem, we wear the mask that grins and lies, it hides our teeth and shades our eyes. So many of us were taught to pretend. The way I heard that in my community growing up often was adults telling children, fix your face, right? That children weren't allowed to look disappointed, weren't allowed to look bored, definitely weren't allowed to look angry. And so you had to always look pleasant, grateful, or neutral. And so some of us, even as adults, are walking around with a fixed face, not only in terms of makeup, but emotionally, that we have suppressed, our grief, suppressed our despair, suppressed our disappointment, suppressed our fear, and I cannot heal what I cannot acknowledge. And so it is important for us to see it, to see the various causes of the disconnect, so that I can begin the journey back home to myself. And I want to shatter silence and shatter shame again. There is no pressure, but for those who are comfortable, we can just name in the chat one of the things we have experienced that created a disconnect. So for me, I'll name being a sexual assault survivor, also dealing with the realities of racism in the larger world and in workplace settings. Both of those have been sources of stress and disconnection where I had to come home to myself. I also lived in Liberia at the time of the Civil War when I was growing up. And so that experience created a need for a homecoming. And growing up in Baltimore, Maryland, with internalized racism, although it was a predominantly Black community, I was often teased about my complexion and about my features. And this is really internalized racism, where for a Black child to insult another Black child, they would say, "You look like an African," right? And that was an insult, right? So had to come home to the truth and the glory of who we are as people of African descent. So if anybody is comfortable in the chat, if you can just share, it doesn't need to be a long story, but a word or phrase about something you have survived that disconnected you. Work abuse. Thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? I'll say chronic illness, yes. Parental abandonment, abortions, physical abuse. Thank you for the truth telling. Childhood trauma, unhealthy relationships, illness, and parental addiction. Thank you. Work abuse. Emotional abuse. Yes. Death of my mom. Thank you. And our condolences. Rejection, emotional abuse, and rape. Yes. Me too, me too. So I invite us to take breath as we take in what has been shared. And I want to name the gift of that rejection, absolutely. The gift in the sharing color and body shaming. Yes, thank you. And I want to appreciate those who felt comfortable sharing. Sexism, yes, absolutely. And I will also want to appreciate those who are reflecting internally but have chosen not to write. That is a part of our healing, right? As trauma survivors, it is important for us to have agency, that we get to choose, right? That's why I said no pressure. You check in with yourself to say, do I want to acknowledge it simply within myself, or do I want to write it? Mental abuse and verbal abuse, right? Yes, so for the unacknowledged and unacknowledged aspects of our journey, for the spoken and unspoken aspects of our journey, for us to take a collective moment of gratitude. Yes, infertility, child loss, and traumatic pregnancy. Thank you for naming those, and those are often not named. Many of these we're often silenced about, which leads people to feel like they're the only one. And alienation, yes. So we break through not only our own shame, but our collective sense of isolation and stigma to know that there are others who have walked this journey. It doesn't have to be identical. It doesn't mean that I know everything about your story because we may have the same category, but there is a connection there. And so I'm grateful. And then that also gives us greater tenderness, compassion, and patience for ourselves, for where we are on the journey, when I recognize and name what I have been through, because some of us have coped with busyness, right? We stay so busy that we are distracted from the truth of our unhealed wounds. And so just instead of going into that lie of like, I don't care, it doesn't matter, I just try not to think about it, for me to really say, it did have an impact and I do care. And my healing is a priority for me. My wholeness is a priority for me. And so this is very important. And so I'm grateful again for your sharing, and even those who just did the internal acknowledgement. So what are the signs that we need a homecoming? That is the first section of the book, talks about these different signs, and it can show up in our emotions. It can also show up in our behavior. So emotionally, you might deal with depression, and depression is more than sadness, right? If you're sad for 2 days and then feel better the third day, right, that was not depression. And the reason I want to point that out is sometimes people who have only experienced sadness try to give advice to people who have experienced clinical depression, and that advice can be very dismissive because we're not grasping the severity of what people are experiencing, right? We also want to name that some people's depression shows up as irritability, and people don't usually have a lot of patience and compassion for an irritable person, for a person with a quote unquote bad attitude, especially if we talk about Black women or if we talk about adolescents. And so for us to be mindful and compassionate, sometimes the people we are dismissing as attitudinal are really in despair, and culturally or religiously, we're taught to mask that, right? Some people have this idea that being depressed is weak, but being angry is strong. So then it shows up with anger and irritability, and underneath that can be grief, can be despair, can be fear. So we want to think about emotionally what shows up for us. And I want to name that anger may be a part of it, and that it is healthy to be outraged about outrageous things, right? It is healthy. Some outrageous things have happened. So the fact that I know that that should not have happened and that that is upsetting is not a problem. That means that I have awareness. It's just then what do I do with the anger so that I don't feel stuck or consumed by it, right? And also for those of you who are feeling numb, all these things are happening and you feel nothing. That's also a trauma response. It means you need a homecoming. And then there are those of us who cover our despair in humor. So while on some levels you can say that's a coping strategy, if I have to do that all the time, it means I have some disconnection from myself. And if I respond to humor when other people are sharing their pain, then that is going to create a divide and a disconnect in the relationship. So you want to think about your own emotional well-being. If you have difficulty sleeping and it's not as a result of a medical condition, or even if it is, that can disconnect you from yourself. If you are engaging in self-destructive behaviors, that can be a sign you need a homecoming. And so abusing substances, emotional eating, picking at our skin or pulling out our hair can all be signs of our distress. Also staying in unhealthy relationships and on toxic jobs. And some of us, you know, there are various reasons, right? So I say this with a lot of grace and compassion. Some people are staying in unhealthy relationships because of the threats of the person they're with. And so that is real fear of needing support and needing safety. And I know that some people stay on jobs for financial pressures, but I would encourage you in any area of your life that you feel stuck to look again, to see if there is any possibility for this not to be the duration of my life. I was talking to a woman who hated her job. She's very gifted, very skilled, and she literally said, I only have 10 more years till retirement. So I want you to take that in. 10 years, that's a long time. A decade of being miserable. So sometimes we don't have a choice, but sometimes we do have a choice. And so I invite you to look at if there are any ways you are participating in circumstances that dishonor you, and what are the possibilities for you as it relates to that. So we need a homecoming. We also understand that stress affects us and affects the people around us, and we respond to it differently. So some of us cope by being busy, and some people cope by staying in the bed all day, right? So neither one is good or bad. It's just the ways that people handle their distress. So we want to have much more compassion and less judgment of each other. We also want to think culturally, religiously, and by gender. What are the rules that we put on people about how they can express what they feel? So people have ideas about ways, men are supposed to act or not act, the ways Black people are supposed to act or not act, the way Christians are supposed to act or not act. And sometimes these rigid scripts don't really set people free, but can be a form of bondage and also make people censor themselves, but their experience internally is still the truth. So we want to think about giving ourselves permission to break free from those regulations so that we can really be ourselves. We also want to think about this term decolonizing psychology, which includes looking at our context, looking at, what came up in the chat. People talked about sexism. I talked about racism and poverty. And so your mental health is not only affected by your choices, but by our society. And so the ways in which we have been affected both historically and in the present is really important for us to come home to ourselves. And then I want to talk about these 4 common responses to our trauma. And after I explain that, I'll shift into our healing, right? So how do we know we need to come home? How do we recognize the symptoms? And then we'll shift into that journey, that healing and wellness journey. So when we are trauma survivors, 4 of the common responses when we face a stressful situation after the initial trauma are fight, flight, freeze, tend, and befriend. And so you want to become aware of what is your go-to strategy, and is that the only strategy you use? Do you overuse it? And do you want to cultivate the ability to be able to calm yourself so that you can think through your strategies in different ways? So the first one is fight mode, right? So there are some of you where nobody's ever going to catch you slipping, right? You show up ready. You show up ready. You stay ready. If anybody says anything to you, you have a quick comeback. You are not going to be defeated. You are a warrior. Beautiful on some days, right? So can anybody think of a benefit and then what could be a consequence of somebody who stays in fight mode?
Exhaustion. That's tiring.
Yes, right? That is tiring. If you're fighting everybody all day, every day, that is exhausting. Prepared, but always defensive. Absolutely. Absolutely. Right? So thank you for that answer. And so we want to check in with ourselves, because some people pride themselves on always staying ready, and yet you are exhausted. And let me also say, sometimes you are treating people like enemies who could have been friends, right? Some people really were not after you, really were not out to get you, but because, that's on your radar and you treat everyone like that, it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy that creates conflict and tension wherever you go because of the difficulties with trust. That can also run people away from friendships or relationships. If you're constantly accusing, constantly looking for offense, then it will be hard for people to sustain relationship, right? The second one is flight. So, and I do want to say a benefit of the fight mode people is, they don't live in regret of not having spoken up for themselves. So there are some of us who will say like, I wish I would have said, or I wish I would have done it. That's right. Some fights are worth it, right? So it's never, it's my message is not that you should never fight. It is you just don't want to be stuck in that mode where you're fighting everybody all the time. But there is a benefit of being able to rally yourself, right? And to be able to advocate for yourself. Very, very true. All right, so then there are those of us who will, our go-to is flight mode. As soon as anything looks a little bit off, we're out of there, right? So those are people who constantly quit jobs. Those are people who are quick to break up, or, I have clients on these dating apps, and if somebody says anything that they're not sure about, like that's the end of that. So they're quick to like shut people down. They might have like 5 different church homes because people are imperfect. So as soon as they see the imperfection, they're out of there, right? So, a cost of that is you never get to have roots and never get to build anything. A strength of that is that you don't overstay in toxic situations, right? So that you're not there trying to justify it, trying to explain it. You're not giving people a million chances. You're saying this was disrespectful to me and I don't have to take that. So that can be the good. It's just you want to check in with yourself to see, is it over applied? If you're honest with yourself, can you think of situations where perhaps you left or ended it prematurely, that you didn't give a chance, or what could be? All right. So we have fight, we have flight, and then many of us have freeze. And those who end up in that freeze mode are, so stunned or shocked that you just kind of check out. And many people who go to freeze grew up with childhood trauma. And so, you may do what we call dissociation, right, which is disconnecting. And that helps, especially as a child. If you're in a situation where you can't leave, then you just kind of leave in your mind, right? So you may have a very active fantasy life. You're daydreaming, you're there, but not there. As an adult, one of the challenges can be that you do that when a situation feels stressful or dangerous, and that can get in the way of you rallying yourself or mobilizing yourself. And so when a situation feels threatening, you just kind of wait for it to be over. And, so an example of that, and hopefully the example is not too triggering, but I was working with a young woman who had been sexually abused growing up when she was on a college campus. There was some sexual harassment that was happening, and she went into that kind of childhood mode of the freezing. And the other young ladies who were present, like, left the place where it was happening. And she checked out, basically, which increased her vulnerability for the actions to continue. So you want to check in with yourself to say, when has it benefited me to be able to check out and just like not think about what was happening? And then are there ways in which I want to work to try to be present, to be able to be activated in those moments, so that I can either speak, or that I can shift, or that I can move. And the last one I'll mention, these are just the most popular, there are others, is tend and befriend. So some of us, when we have faced trauma or stressful situations, we identify with the person who has the power, the person who is being abusive, and we try to cater to that person in the hopes that they will keep us safe, right? So you can see how that would develop. If you grew up with domestic violence in your house, intimate partner abuse in your house, while some people connect with the parent who is being victimized, Some people connect with the aggressor and believe like if I cater to them against the other parent, then they will protect me and I'll be on their team. So then you fast forward as an adult when you have some abuses and bullying taking place in the workplace, and some people will say, oh, well, this abusive person in the workplace seems to have all the power, so let me be their best friend, let me protect them, let me cover that for them, and that will keep me safe, whether emotionally or keep my job safe or whatever that may be. When that shows up around racism, it is when people to build relationship with white people will put down other Black people in the hopes that like if I join with them, then they're gonna like me. I'll be the special Black person and they will esteem me higher, advance me higher than the other Black people. We also see that with sexism, where some women, as a survival tactic, will associate with men in a way that is actively trying to block and put down other women. So sometimes there's that idea of scarcity, like I want to be the only one. And so I'm going to block anybody of my own identity instead of us working collaboratively. So I invite you to reflect on what you have noticed within yourself, ways that your strategies have served you and what they have cost you, and if there are any ways that you want to shift and grow as it relates to how you respond when you're activated in that place of stress. So I invite you to take a cleansing breath as we continue our journey home to ourselves and recognizing the ways in which we want to move forward. I intentionally didn't ask people to have to share the effects of their stress or trauma because we're going to allow people to honor that part of their process inwardly. And then I would encourage you, if there are those in your inner circle that you are comfortable sharing your awareness as it relates to how these things have affected you, I would encourage you to do that. So as we reclaim our authentic selves, one of the strategies that we talk about in the book is reparenting ourselves. So you want to think about what are some of the things that a good parent does that I want to begin to do for myself, right? So a present parent will have some sense of a schedule, right? They won't have like an 8-year-old up at 3 a.m. just like watching Netflix. So you want to say to yourself, I need to go to bed, right? I need to give myself permission to rest. A healthy, engaged parent is going to say, we're not just going to eat anything. And so to reflect on yourself and say, as I reparent myself, I make a decision I'm not just eating fast food and vending machines. I make a decision I'm not just eating fried food. I make a decision that I'm going to put some greens on that plate, right? That I've had enough soda, that I'm going to drink some water. And so think about even the boundaries that engaged parents set, right? So healthy, engaged parents won't let their kid just go anywhere with anybody, right? They're going to ask some questions. And some of us have not held boundaries up for ourselves, that there are certain people you don't need to let in your house anymore. There are certain people you don't need to go to lunch with anymore. And so can you be that healthy parent for yourself and set up that boundary? Some people don't need to be allowed to continue to talk to you in that way anymore. And so setting up those lines. A healthy parent will also create opportunities for the things that bring their child joy, right? So my son, when he was little, was into construction sites. I'm not into construction, but that's his thing, so I'm going to make it happen, right? So for yourself, how have you made time for the things that you enjoy? And what are the ways you need to be more intentional about that, right? We do our work because we say we have to, but where is your delight? Is there any delight in your life? Anything that brings you pleasure, that brings you joy, anything that is praiseworthy, that you have made a priority to create space for in your own life? Along with reparenting, we want to give ourselves permission to build our confidence over time. So in mindfulness, there's something called beginner's mind, and it is a comfort with learning. Some of us, if we're not already the experts, we don't want to try it, right? We say, I'm not good at it. I don't want to participate. And so in order to build confidence, I have to have the emotional capacity to be a beginner, right? To start and know that as I do it, the confidence will grow. Many of us want like a formula for our confidence to be instant. Like, tell me what I need to do today to be a confident person, instead of allowing ourselves the process of building our confidence over time based on our experiences. It's also important for us to come home to ourselves with emotional intelligence. So being able to tell ourselves the truth about how we feel, and that's what you all did in the chat box, and also with the tree exercise, and then to be able to express what I feel. Many of us in our relationships, we want people to read our minds. We want people to guess. And while that would be lovely, our maturity and emotional intelligence require that we communicate instead of being frustrated with people for not guessing, right? So know what you feel and then communicate what you feel. And the other parts of emotional intelligence are being able to recognize and read the cues of other people's emotions, because we're not all feeling the same thing at the same time. So when they say read the room, right, I want to pay attention. If I'm coming in to talk to my boss about a raise, and when I walk in, I don't note, right, I don't observe that this is not really a good time. Like, they're emotionally, I don't know what's going on, but something is going on with them. So this is not the best time for my request, right? So you want to pay better attention to your children, to your partner, to your coworkers, instead of assuming that everybody is emotionally in the same place you are in. And then to be able to work together with people or build relationship with people who are different than you, right? So, growing up in my household, my brother was a jokester and I'm a very sensitive kid, right? That's like very two different personalities. I now have a daughter and son with very different personalities. And so we have to be able to connect with and to treat with compassion and kindness the people who show up in our circle, knowing that a person does not have to be a clone, does not have to be identical to me in order for me to work with them or connect with them. Then I want to talk about this importance of self-care and community care. And I'm going to pause here to ask you, what do you think is a barrier to self-care? What keeps people from taking better care of themselves? It could be people in general or you personally. What keeps you from doing things to take care of yourself? Being busy. Pride, avoidance, responsibilities, perceived financial limits. Yes, trying to take care of others that we love. I went too far up. Don't believe they are important enough, not valuing self. People think it's being selfish, resources, time, not enough time, busy, feeling like there is no time or finance, or finances. Overworked, taking care of others. Denial. I often put others first and not putting myself as a priority. Yeah. Thank you. All right, so I will share with you all, the journey of my self-care workshops, right? So I used to do self-care workshops, and the majority of the workshop was me describing all the different things you could do to take care of yourself, as if people didn't already know that, right? Then I got a revelation. People know what these strategies are. If I were to ask you all right now to write in the chat what are ways you could take care of yourself, you all could, write them down. And then I thought that the issue was time management, because people do all these workshops on work-life balance, and the issue is managing your time, and people talk about busyness. And then I was reading a book by a chaplain for a sports team, and he tells the story of one of the athletes coming to him and saying, "Chaplain, I need you to pray for me to have more time to pray, because I never have time to pray." And the chaplain said, "You don't have a time management problem, you have an appetite problem. The things we are hungry for, we make time for." Right? If I'm hungry, I'm going to find a drive-thru, I'm going to find a food, I'm going to find something. I'm going to find something because it's important to me. And so we want to be mindful of what has convinced me that I am not a priority. And someone said in the chat, some of us have been raised with that message that is selfish, right? You shouldn't do anything for yourself, that's selfish. And that self-neglect, or being a martyr, trying to be a mini Messiah, erasing yourself for everyone else, is held up as noble or Christian or the right thing to do. And there are costs of that. And I would say for those who are present who are Christian, that doesn't even follow the example of Jesus, because he would help people and then he would disappear. They would say, "Where did he go?" Where did he go? He was gone. He was gone. And we want to really pattern our lives to know, like, when I show up, I want to show up, right? Like, I'm here and we're doing what we're doing. And there has to also be time where I'm not answering requests. There has to also be time when, what we said, like laying down, laying in the bed. There has to also be time where I'm just going for a walk for me, and it's not to be of service of anybody else. This walk is just for me. And so I invite you to think about, what are the messages you have received that talk you into the idea that to be a good person, you have to neglect yourself or have no needs, and that everybody else's needs are important. And so each of us have stories along those lines of, that shaped us, that caused us to believe that that is what was required of us as women, or that is what was required of us in order to be acceptable or to be chosen or to be religious, and to know that we are deserving of care. I had an interesting conversation when I was a graduate student. A part of our process becoming a psychologist is, they encourage you to get your own therapy, which is a wonderful thing, right? And so I was talking to this therapist, Dr. Jan Powell, and I was talking about how growing up in the church, I used to hate that, my dad was a pastor. So I used to hate that Sunday after service, they would have this table with like linen and fine china and all this stuff for my dad and our family, and they would like serve us food, and like everybody else from the church was in this long, it was a big church, a long line waiting to serve themselves with these like paper plates and plastic utensils and all of that. And it just like rubbed me wrong. Like, I didn't like being, it felt like elitist, it felt all this stuff. And so I told the therapist about how I would get up from the table and go to get in the back of the line and wait, until after everybody else had eaten to like get a plate. And so the therapist said like something really profound. He said, "Thema, I understand that you didn't want to be first, but why did you have to be last?" Right? Such like an important moment of like, why did I feel it was bad for me to eat until everybody else, maybe if there's anything left, then I'll take it, right? And that can be a way that we have lived our lives of like, no, you go, no, you go, no, you, I'm fine, no, you, no, you, no, you. And so there can be a cost of our self-neglect, right? And so I'm going to pause there to ask if anyone can share a cost that they've experienced of when they weren't taking care of themselves. What did it cost you? My health. Yes. You can type it or you can unmute and speak it, either way. What has it cost when you weren't taking care of yourself. The health is a big one. Burnout, yes. Doing too much. My truth. Ooh, I love that. Yes, yes. Right? When people are like, how are you? I'm fine. Meanwhile, you're exhausted. Stress, mental wellness. Yep. It costs, it costs, it costs. Right. Pain, unhappiness, lost time. That's a big one. Thank you for that. It was like how many years, I was going to say months, how many years of my life, right? Were given away to that. So resentment, that is another one, right? You're doing all of this over giving, overextending yourself, and you can actually end up resentful for the people that you're supposedly helping, right? Yeah, that's an important one. So self-care is important. Lost time and health, absolutely. Thank you so much. Mental wellness, anger, yes, yes. So self-care is important, but also something called community care, right? Our care for each other. And I'll just tell you, therapists who are like social justice oriented, have really like critique self-care. And their critique is, if you have a single mother of three and you tell her to like light candles and like meditate, that's like insufficient, right? They're like, she needs a livable wage. She needs, quality, affordable childcare. She needs all of these things. And so what I say to that is yes, and I believe it's both, not either or. Like some people will say, I don't want to hear about self-care. It's all about community care. But I would say while we're working on the legislation and the policies for all those other things she needs, what are the ways that that single mother can honor herself, right? So we don't want to get into this false dichotomy of which one is it, right? Do we need legislation or do we need our private internal practices? We need both. So I encourage you to be mindful within yourself and within your community about how we can do both. Another aspect of our homecoming is our spiritual practice. And so your spiritual practices may be prayer, maybe meditation. The arts are a wonderful way to connect with our spirits. And so poetry and dance and song. And so I want to encourage you, if you don't already do it, to create a morning ritual. So one, don't wait until you have to get out of bed to wake up, right? You want to wake up and in the morning have some time to fill your well so that you go through the day with your well already full. So you're not starting your day from a place of anxiety or lack, right? So to fill your day in the beginning of the day, that might be journaling. It might be reading sacred texts or scripture. It might be prayer or meditation. It may be getting up and stretching and dancing. And then I would say for those who work outside of the home, I would say even if you work in the home, to think about in this season of my life, what's going to be my theme song, right? Right? You need a soundtrack for your life. And so when you put that song on, that helps to shift you. It helps to remind you. It helps to bring you home so that then during the day, when you face drama, distraction, discouragement, and all the other stuff that rises up around you, you have that soundtrack playing underneath that helps to affirm you and ground you in the truth of who you are. So we're going to have some song nominations. I'm going to ask you to either unmute and tell us the name of a song that's been speaking to you lately, or you can write it in the chat box. Give us some nominations that will help people get their day right. Who has the name of a song?
When I read through the book, etc., Him from the Wiz just kept coming through my mind.
Yes, absolutely. I love it. I love it. That was Yolanda Adams, Still I Rise. Yes, that's a good one too. Woo. This Is My Fight song. Yes. I Know My Purpose. Oh, beautiful. That's what we need. Never Lost, Elevation Worship. I Prevail. Come on, Never Lost. Yes. One that comes to mind is Anything's Possible. Yes, come on. This is good. You all better jot them down if you don't already know them. Rise Up. Yes. Oh, you're going to go floating into work. They're going to say, like, what happened to you? It's important. It makes all the difference in the world. I think I tell Yolanda Adams victory. Yes. Bless somebody else. Yes. Beautiful. I'm telling you, it will shift you. All hail the power of Jesus' name. All right. Yes. Ooh. Both, beginning of the day and what will end up happening. Then always put on some Mary Blige. Yes, Mary J. Blige, Janet Jackson, old school R&B. Absolutely. The goodness of the Lord, CeCe Winans, anything from Maverick City worship. Yes. For Stephanie Gritzinger. Yes. Beautiful. So, it's funny because what you listen to then, I don't know if you've noticed that sometimes either you'll wake up from your sleep and you'll be humming something, right? Or those lyrics are already there with you. And throughout the day, you can it's not even in your awareness, but Never Lost is another good one. Yes. And so, whatever the genre, it's about what speaks to you, right? So if it speaks to you, if it gets you where you need to be, then go for that. And I will say for me, dance is healing. And so moving our bodies can also be an important part of our homecoming and getting us where we need to be. So I'm just going to check in and tell you all it is 20 after, and at 40 after, I'll stop and we'll have 20 minutes of questions. Is that all right? You okay? To my facilitators? All right. I didn't want to make me reshare. So with liberation psychology, some people also talk about indigenous practices. So with indigenous practices, it is our cultural practices, right? So psychology is important. I'm a big advocate of therapy. I'm a big advocate of your spiritual practices. And there are cultural ways of coping of, what did your ancestors do? And we often point to the ancestral wounds of oppression, but we also have ancestral wisdom, right? So, what are the ways, besides stuffing it or just turning to food or to alcohol, but what are the other ways that you observed or that you have read and learned about that our community engaged in to heal? So, I'll give you this by way of example. They have been doing, researchers have done all these big studies about the nervous system, and they talk about the vagus nerve in particular. And in these big studies, they discover that when people are trying to we would say calm your nerves, calm your nervous system, they find that after breathing, right, taking cleansing breath, the other two things that are really helpful are humming and rocking. Now, if that's not a Black church mother, grandmother, I don't know what is. Humming and rocking to calm your nervous system. All right, so now you can know there's research to support it. So we think about, the ways that we healed. Collective singing, drumming, when we think about our gathering, right? Not just isolation, but connection with each other. So I really want to push back on the idea that if you're lonely, that means you don't love yourself. That's not true. You can love yourself and still desire community. We're community people, right? And so when people are feeling isolated or friendless or lacking connection, or the connections are not deep as they would like them to be, it feels very surface, to be intentional in terms of our cultural resources that I want to make a priority in this season of my life of building healthy, mutual, reciprocal relationships, right? Instead of isolating myself and being like a one-person show and it's me against the world, to shift into my cultural wisdom that there's healing in community, there's healing in friendship, in sisterhood, in brotherhood, in connection. And so to show up with more transparency and to not just have to be the strong one for everyone else, But some of us for our homecoming have to learn how to receive, to learn how to receive. A part of our homecoming can also be mindfulness. Mindfulness simply means paying attention in the present moment on purpose without judgment, right? So some of us are caught up with regrets for the past or worry for the future, but giving yourself to be present where you are right now, right? And that's so key because a lot of our stress is stressing about what could happen or what might happen, and that could make us miss the blessings of the moment, right? I want to have gratitude for what is, not just worry about what could go wrong, right? So that's a trauma response. When some people get nervous when good things are happening because then they're just afraid something bad is going to happen, which robs you from the times that were actually good. And so I do want to name around mindfulness that our culture and our faith are important. So some people get anxious if they research and see that some of the scholars who practice mindfulness do it from a Buddhist perspective. So then they think, well, it's against my religion. But there is a long history of what's called Christian contemplative practice. There's even something called Christian mindfulness. So it's interesting. Sometimes we're using different words, but speaking of the same thing. So for example, in secular mindfulness, they say just focus on the breath, right? In Christian mindfulness, they say focus on the presence of God, right? Then when you read scripture, what is God but our breath, right? So whatever aligns with you, to know it is not against your religion to sit still, right? So when people say, oh no, meditation is against my religion, it's not Christian, it's just not true, right? So we're used to, it's that Mary or Martha dynamic. Do you have to be running around all the time to prove that you love God, or can you sit still in the presence of God and breathe? Yeah. So that is a part of our homecoming as well. We want to have compassion for ourselves, be present in this moment, to stop being so judgmental and harsh toward ourselves and others, to be open to learning something new. Some of us are stuck in old patterns because we say that's how I've always been. Some of us will say that's just who I am. Well, sometimes we develop these ways of being because of our trauma, but we don't want to have to stay that way, that we want to shift and heal and grow. We also want to value our connection with each other. And that last one, acceptance, some people have misread that and think that it means accepting injustice or accepting bad treatment. That's not what it is. It really is recognition of what is. So then I can figure out what I want to do about it. But first, I have to acknowledge what is the truth, right? What is the truth about the people in my family? What is the truth about this job? What is the truth about how I have treated myself? So when I recognize that truth, it doesn't mean that it must stay that way, but I must first acknowledge what is, right? So truth telling is key. And then we want to recognize that we're enough. I don't have to constantly try to prove myself. And often I know we were raised with that idea of you have to prove you're twice as good. You have to be the smartest one, the fastest one, the richest one, all of this, the prettiest one. And so to know you're already enough, right? That's the healing of when I don't have anything to prove. So then I can be okay with me, right? With me just being. And so we want to take a moment for our meditation. And so I'm going to invite you to get in a comfortable position. And if you can uncross your legs and arms, if that aligns with you, you can close your eyes or lower your gaze, tuning into your breath at your own pace, paying attention to the inhale through your nose, exhale through your mouth. As you start to scan your body, noticing where the tension is, sending breath throughout the body, giving yourself permission to breathe and release, relaxing your forehead, releasing your jaw, relaxing your neck and your shoulders, dropping your shoulders and letting your arms and hands relax, releasing the tension in your back, upper, middle, lower back, relaxing your chest and your abdomen, relaxing your legs and your feet, setting intentions for self-compassion and for clarity, bringing to mind what you need more of in your life, allowing those thoughts of your needs to come to the forefront of your mind. And becoming aware of any stress that you've been carrying that you're ready to release from your heart, your mind, your body, and your spirit, giving yourself permission to release what you can with a cleansing breath. And at your own pace, you can recenter your focus to the room. And as we ask that question of what you need more of in your life, if you're comfortable, you can either share in the chat or unmute your microphone and give us a sense of what you're aware that you need more of. All right, it is for your own awareness. I want to also encourage you to think about embodied healing, to not hold stress in your body, and so to think about walking, dancing, stretching. And we also want to learn these compassion holds. So one, I want to encourage you to think about what you will do in terms of your physical body, knowing how to be content. Thank you so much. So I want to show you, well, one, I'd like you to make a commitment to yourself of what you're going to do to move more. So we're not just stuck and stable and holding things, but as we move, that helps us to release the stress we have been holding. I want to show you some compassion holds. So one is if it, place one hand on your heart, and if you're comfortable, one hand on your belly, and take a breath in through the nose. Exhale through the mouth. The hand that is on the belly, place on the forehead. The other hand is on your heart. One hand on the forehead, one hand on the heart. And tuning into your breath, inhale through the nose. Exhale through the mouth. The hand that is on the heart, place on the back of the head, giving yourself the message, I have you, right? You're held up, you are contained. Inhale through the nose. Exhale through the mouth. And butterfly, crisscross your arms. Inhale in through the nose. Exhale out through the mouth. And embrace yourself. One hand on the shoulder, one hand on your rib cage. Inhale in through the nose. Exhale out through the mouth. So our journaling, we're actually going to speak out loud. And I'm going to ask you to fill in the blank for this sentence. And you can unmute and speak it, or you can write it. And the statement is, up until now, I blank, 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 but from this point forward, I blank. Up until now, I blank, but from this point forward, I blank. So you can unmute and share, or you can write it. Do you need to hear the sentence again? Up until now, I blank. From this point forward, I blank.
I'll go.
Mhm.
Up until this point, I would find excuses to not do self-care. But from this point forward, I commit to removing those excuses and making it happen.
Beautiful. Yes, thank you. And Melissa shared, up until now, I felt I had to answer questions posed, but from this point forward, I will pause for as long as I need or want to. Yes, absolutely. Some people are always the fillers, right? And feel the weight of that. But taking what I like to call sacred pause. Take sacred pause. Beautiful. Up until now, I took back worrying. From this point forward, I will be more intentional about letting God and letting go. Yes. Up until now, I stressed over what was needed. Now I will be content with where I am. Yes. Up until now, I worried, but from this point forward, I believe the best solution will be presented. Yes. Up until now, I have pushed myself to do everything. From this point forward, to be very selective about what I do. Beautiful. I love it. And in caps, very selective. Up until now, I have been arrogant, but from this point forward, I will be humble and courageous. Beautiful. So beautiful. Thank you. And so true, too. It takes courage to walk in humility. Yes. Up until now, I overworked to avoid. From this day forward, I will settle in and feel. Thank you. That's good. Up until now, what did I do to deserve that form? From this point forward, to love myself and grow in faith. Yes, so instead of blaming ourselves, loving ourselves and growing in faith. Beautiful. And we've done that, often because we're trying to make sense of things. We try to figure out the why and, getting to that place of the what now, right? What will I choose for me in the present and going forward? So let's take an inhale, and if it aligns with you, you can lift your hands over your head. Inhale, exhale. One more time, inhale and exhale. All right, if you can just say, let's see, we have another. Up until now, I did everything and lacked in my exercise. From this point forward, I will do less and do more exercise and self-treatment. Up until now, I have put self-care on hold, but from this point, I will be more intentional about self-care. Beautiful, wonderful. Up until now, I tried to hug everyone, but from this time forward, I will also hug myself. Oh, wonderful, wonderful. I hope you all will jot these down or that you'll remember them for yourselves. Our commitments. And so I say to you, welcome home, and I am happy to take your questions. So any questions about the book or about your journey or about anything that I have said on today? Ralph?
Hey, Dr. Bryant, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
My question is not what made you write the book, but what specifically triggered you to write it now?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for the question. So I mentioned being a pastor's daughter. So growing up, I say my brother and I were definitely given this message of it being important to give back, right? To be of service. And so with being a psychologist, I find that a lot of the things we write stay in these like academic journals that you have to basically work at a university to have access to the journal. And so there's all this information that's not given to the community. So I started putting like mental health messages in social media. So I'm on Facebook and TikTok and Instagram and Twitter. And, but in those, you have to be really brief. And so I would always have people asking me follow-up questions. And so then I started the podcast. So the Homecoming podcast is about 3 years old. And those are like 30-minute episodes about various mental health issues. And I often have people, who are all over the world who are listening, but then they write with a lot of times the same questions as each other. So it's like I could try to reply to each of these emails, which just wouldn't be possible because it's so many, or I could create this resource so that all the information is in the book, right? So I can say, look at the book, the information is there. And so being in the pandemic where, we basically had to stay in our homes, ended up being the perfect time. I would say one, well, what really led to it, I will plant this as a seed that our pastor and faith community will appreciate. Um, your seeds will bring a harvest even when you don't see it initially. So when I started the podcast, like I don't have advertisers. And so like I was paying the cost for like the recording and everything myself, but it was in my heart to do. So I just kept doing it. And, people would share that they were blessed and I was just doing it. And the way the publisher found me was through the podcast. So I literally got an email from the publisher saying, would you be interested in writing a book? And I said yes. And they said, well, we only work with people that have agents. Do you have a literary agent? I said, I don't. They said, would you be open to us setting up an interview for you with an agent so you could see if you like them? I said yes. So I have an agent who happens to be a pastor's wife. And so that's how it happened. And so it's a great harvest. And, just be faithful to the vision when you're given a vision, even if sometimes it's partial, you might not see all the way where it's going or where it's headed, but just be faithful to the vision and, you'll see what comes of it. Anything else? And no pressure. I cut some of my slides, so if you all don't have questions, I can give you 15 more minutes.
There's a question in the chat.
Okay.
Says, what can you do to encourage someone you love to also take this journey? From Hannah Collins.
Yes, yes. So I have had several people who have not only shared the podcast, but they actually listened together. And it's been interesting, both couples that listen to it together and then discuss it. I've had parents and their kids, whether they're adult children or like teenagers or even preteens, who will listen to an episode together and then talk about it. And even with the book, it's been very interesting. One, I've had several people who have reached out to let me know that they started like book clubs or that it's the topic of their book club, which is wonderful. And so I say that to say sometimes if you just say to someone like, you need help, then people can kind of take that as like a judgment or something. But if I instead say, this was a resource that was helpful to me, I think you would like this book, or I think you would like this episode, or I would love to know what you think about it, that can often give people the permission. And then I will also say your own testimony of, like that up until now piece. Like you can say, I've been running around doing all of this, and it has cost me what we talked about. It cost my health, it cost me my joy, it cost me my peace. And so I just slowed down. And sometimes by us telling our own story, it gives people permission to like reflect on their journey and say, oh, like that sounds like me, or it feels like that's a change I would like to make. So as I think was shared in the chat, with humility, our own testimony can encourage people to join us on the journey.
We have a hand, and then we have 2 questions in the chat. So,
all right,
Larry, I'll let you go first. Make sure you unmute.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Doing great. Glad you're here.
I'm intrigued by the book's title, Homecoming. I grew up in the South, where homecoming Sundays were big days in the church, where folk who better way would come back home, so to speak. And as far as homecoming Sunday was a revival time. So when I saw homecoming, it kind of triggered me, kind of took me back to really, something I guess reconnecting, coming home again and being a part of that community that you grew up in, and now you come back to share really where you are now. So I think the title really caught my attention.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad you caught that, because it does have a cultural meaning.
Yes.
And so, as you said, all the word you used of community, of coming back, revival, celebration, that is exactly what it is. Like to come back to ourselves and to come back to community. It is celebration worthy, right? That we made it back. So thank you.
So one of the questions in the chat is in dealing with relationships, there are those who are positive and those who are negative. What do you do when the negative begins to get on your last nerves?
Yes. And so some people often look for the bad, and sometimes it's a survival strategy where they grew up in a circumstance where like they had to figure everything out for themselves. So they have trained their mind to look for the problem. And so it depends on the person. Some people are open to feedback and are willing to change if we say, one of the things we know from couples work or from relationships work, that the affirmation has to outnumber the criticism. Because if not, people give up trying because they feel like they can't win with you anyway, right? So to say to the person who is negative is, I notice that you will point out the things that need work or the things that are a problem, and that's important for us to see. But for my well-being and for the sake of relationship, I would need to hear from you. Can you identify anything that is good? Do you see anything that is positive? And so just so you can have an example of how people can shift or become more aware, I had a client who was sharing, she caught herself, well, after she actually already did it, but her husband had asked her what she thought about something he did. And she immediately went into the critique. But as she started speaking, she could see his face, like that everything shifted. He had come to her all excited. And then as she's talking, he's deflated, right? And then she realized, like, I'm doing it again, right? So it's like, to give yourself pause and to know, like, it's not just for me to look for the gaps or the holes. That's how some supervisors are at work. They only tell you when you messed up. They never acknowledge what was good. And so I would say, to try to communicate it to the person. Some people will be open to the feedback, and then that's great. Those who are not, then I just reduce and minimize my time with them. And also, I try not to take it personally, that's their psychology, that's not me.
All right, another question in the chat, and then we do have a hand. So it's a little long, but stick with me. Skeptics, particularly in academia, tend to dismiss spirituality, spiritual practice. How have your colleagues responded to how you bridge psychology and spirituality? And what advice would you give to faith leaders to encourage therapy in Jesus per se without feeling that somehow going to therapy is having less faith?
Right. I love it. Love both questions. So one, I will say, what helps me to bridge the gap among mental health professionals is to say to them, we talk a lot about cultural awareness, but culture is not only race and ethnicity. So it is gender, it's sexuality, it's age, it's religion, it's migration status, all of these different factors. And we have research that shows that mental health professionals on average are less religious than the general public. So that means we have largely created models that ignore faith, and we are applying them to people who are much more likely to be persons of faith. And so I also say to them around these issues of diversity that people of color and women are more likely to endorse spirituality and religiosity than white people and men. And so when you neglect, ignore, pathologize, demonize religion, who is the most likely to be disturbed? People of color and women. So it is unethical care. So just like it is not appropriate to ignore a person's race or gender, it's not appropriate to ignore the way people make meaning of the world, and to do that respectfully. So that's what I say to mental health professionals, and I think when I frame it that way, that usually allows them to see the importance of it. And also, we have research that talks about um, uh, positive religious coping, but also acknowledge negative religious coping, right? It's important that we hold both ends of the spectrum. For some people, faith has been a major resource, and then there are people who have been terribly harmed in faith communities. So we have to be able to acknowledge both. In terms of the faith community getting on board, I think, the big piece is for those who are respected, leaders in faith communities to become vocal about mental health, about advocating for it and encouraging it. And it actually can be a relief to ministers who can be given permission to refer instead of feeling like, like I have a master's of divinity. And I can tell you in that program, we had one semester on ministry during times of crisis, and the whole semester focused on helping people with grief and loss. So while grief and loss is important, and every pastor is going to have to do funerals, it was no mention in the course about how to help someone around intimate partner abuse, how to help survivors of molestation, how to help someone who is living with bipolar disorder. Like they don't get any of that training. And so to be able to say it's okay to not have to feel like you need to be an expert in everything. So you can provide pastoral care. And as you're providing pastoral care, also, every pastor should have a list of referrals to be able to say to a member, this is a place that you can call, maybe if they have a sliding scale or whatever might be appropriate for that person, to give that permission and to know it's not either or. You can pray on your way to therapy. Depending on the therapist, you could pray at therapy, you could pray when you leave. And so we don't have to choose one or the other.
All right, we got two hands. We have Stacy and then Melissa. So Stacy, feel free to unmute.
Good evening, Dr. Bryant. Good evening, everyone.
Thank you. Good evening.
Yes. Well, thank you, Dr. Bryant, for the book and for this time. I've found it to be very helpful. In your book, you mentioned earlier about communicating with persons who have not been exposed to the information, right? And just sharing with them. And what I like is there's a section in your book, I haven't completed reading it, but there's a section, if I recall, where you had shared, you've given you've done a session and everyone was coming around you and thanking you. And there was this one lady and you could read her face and you understood that she was not approaching you from a position necessarily of thankfulness. And when she did come into your space, she did not believe that you were an abuse survivor. But you did not win her over necessarily because she thought that you were too well put together. But you were able to touch a part of her in that it was not what you said, but it was your demeanor. And she basically confessed that she could not see how you could be a survivor. Because you weren't poor, you didn't look poor, and you didn't come from a place of poverty, and you weren't homeless like she was. Yeah. And you could see that was the point at which she broke. How can we be mindful of touching persons in a way that is meaningful? In other words, so we may look as though we have it all together, and we touched on it earlier, that's what we are expected to do, I guess, at church, in society, whatever. But everybody has some bit of brokenness and everybody's going through some journey. How do we touch persons? How do we become emotionally intelligent to touch persons in a way so that we are helpful to them, as opposed to just saying, how are you doing? And they say, I am fine. And you going on your way, but that person is not fine. Or somebody asking you, how are you doing? And you say, oh, I'm fine. But when you're really not. How do we get more truth-telling situations that bring healing?
Yes, thank you so much for the question. So it is transparency. Part of it is telling our story. Transparency is contagious. So while everybody is acting fake, people are just more likely to stay fake. So then if I say like, how are you? I'm tired, right? And then you get like the echoes of me too, me too, me too. So we can start to shift the dialogue by being more honest and more transparent. Also, that word that came up before around humility, right? That if people meet me one-on-one, it's not like the resume, right? It's just, I'm a person. We're all people. And so, but that's a heart thing, right? Because some people want me to teach them how to appear authentic, right? So that would still be like a performance, but like sincerely in your heart, when you know your own vulnerability, when you know that where you are is not only by your effort, but by grace, then that will come across. And then the last thing I'll just say, instead of just saying, how are you? Because people will say fine and you, a good question to ask is, how have you been managing? Or what's this season been like for you? That usually pulls a deeper answer than how are you?
Unmute, Melissa.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, Stacy was on the same vein. So I just want to thank you for creating a book that's not for the shelf, but it's more for self. And even though it was given to me more or less through the Psychologists Association, so it put me in one context. But as I went through it over and over again, I had to keep flipping back to the stories, etc., the little piece, the examples, the activities, etc. So it's definitely something I have to keep picking up to look through and practice and based on circumstances. So I really appreciate that. And also as an ABSI member, I do, yes, without any apologies whatsoever.
Yes.
I can see the importance of making sure that spirituality piece is in there and the principles of Mott to make sure that as we move forward, we do have that balance in our perspective, because yes, there's trauma, but there's also joy and peace and celebration. And so thank you for cultivating a means of having a conversation that needs to be continued. So I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. And I love that phrase. It's not for the shelf, it's for the self. I love it. Beautiful. Well, I know we are at our time. I'm going to ask you all to think of what you need more of in your life, whether you think of a principle, joy, of love, or of connection, of peace, and to begin to rub your hands together so we can just generate our energy. And as you think about what you need more of, to know there are people who are on this Zoom or watching on other platforms who need that as well. And if we can just send that out to the other people who are present, that as I receive more love, that you receive more love, that as I receive more peace, that you receive more peace, that as I receive more joy, that you would receive more joy, that as I receive more fulfillment, that you would receive more fulfillment. Amen. Ashe, let it be so. Thank you so much.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Dr. Thema. Thank you. Thank you. This has been, at least for me, empowering, life transforming, informative. And we just want to say thank you just on behalf of just everyone online, for everyone who would tune in at a later time. On behalf of my colleagues, Dr. Allison, Dr. Sharita Reyna, Dr. Green, president of Bermuda College, and just those partners that just made this happen. We want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. And we look forward to having you on island at some point in the near future. Amen. Dr. Allison or Dr. Reyna or Dr. Green, did you want to say any just last words before we sign off?
I just want to echo that. Thank you so much. We really appreciate the time that you took out to speak to us. All of us here today from all walks of life. The Bermuda Psychological Association really appreciates the time to talk to you from a professional standpoint, but from a spiritual standpoint. And again, we gave some books away on a talk show, and they were so thankful to have the opportunity to read the book and know that they can listen to this at a later date, because it's a very busy weekend. So I just want to thank you so much for your time, and this has been impactful to myself, and I know for those that are on this call right now.
Thank you so much.
Amen. Dr. Reyna?
I want to thank you on behalf of the Bermuda College for giving up your Saturday morning to spend with us. It's really appreciated. And as we celebrate Mental Health Month, I think it's important. As you would know, being a higher education institution, COVID has not helped with mental health issues among our young people as well as our not so young people in higher education. So these tools and skills, I'm hoping that we'll be able to share them with others and see a change in some of the activities that we're seeing with our young people at this point in time. So I do appreciate you.
Thank you.
I just want to say, because I see in the chat therapy resources on island. So we do have a bermudapsychology.com website. You can always go to the government website and see all the registered psychologists on island. So there are some resources available there that you can reach out to, or the Bermuda Psychological Association. And we have an email and a website where you can reach out if you have any questions.
And I
Dr.
should have
Allison,
said that the books are also available at the Bermuda College Bookstore as well.
Oh, that makes me so happy.
Dr. Allison, just to that question about therapy resources, if possible, if you can send me those links and that information, and I could push them out through my channels. Okay.
Perfect. And I don't know how long we're going to be on, but I'll see if I can just drop the link to the website in the chat. So if anybody needs it.
Okay, Dr. Rayner, I don't know if you.
Just really echoing what's been said already. This has been such a wonderful opportunity to be able to be with everyone and gain this information and this knowledge. And I'm really grateful that you reached out to us, Reverend Jakimo, to participate and be part of this. So thank you very much. And thank you, Dr. Thema.
Thank you.
Amen. Amen. God bless you, Dr. Thema. Have an incredible rest of your day. Again, to each and everybody, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in. And I just pray that you were as blessed as me, as encouraged as me, as challenged and as stretched as I was today. Be encouraged. I always tell the church, allow yourself, be strengthened, but also allow your life to be a blessing to somebody else. And so God bless you. And hopefully we can all connect some way soon.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Thema.
you. Have a wonderful day.
Okay. All right. If you guys want to unmute yourselves and say, hey, you can. I'll stay on for a few moments. We have a couple of, okay, the links. For those that are on, if you was looking for those links, Dr. Allison just placed them in the chat. Oh, okay. All right. And Dr. Allison, Dr. Rayner, we will be in touch. Dr. Green, thank you again, ma'am, for what the college did. Amen.
Thank you so much. This is a great way to start the morning for me. So thanks, everyone.
Amen.
Here, Dr. Allison and Dr. Rayner.
Thank you.
All right. God bless everybody.
Bless you, sir.
Thank you, Elder.